Happy Friday. Welcome here to another edition of Husker Online Headlines. Sean Callahan, Steve Sipple with you here every week as we dissect through what we think are 5 of the major headlines. And we're about a week away from Nebraska being in Indianapolis for Big Ten Media Days. And then they'll open up fall camp on Monday, July 31st. So we're almost there. And we're going to start things off. We're going to start off with a little SEC Media Days talk and also Big Ten Media Days talk and Nebraska talk. Let's go headline number 1. Let's bring in On3's latest edition, Andy Staples, formerly with The Athletic, Sports Illustrated, joining us here on HuskerOnline Headlines. Andy, first of all, welcome here to the team at On3. We're excited to have you, and you are going to be launching your own daily show. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to kind of give our viewers an idea of where they can follow and watch you in the coming weeks ahead.
Oh, it's launched. There's 4 episodes out. If they want to catch up on the backlog, you can find it on the On3 YouTube channel and also all your favorite podcast platforms. So Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Overcast, Pocket Cast, you name it. We're on it. So but we did 4 shows this week, and we'll start our normal 5 show a week routine next week with a live show Sunday night, and then we'll go through Thursday. We'll be at Big Ten Media Days with you guys, so it's going to be a lot of fun.
When you just got back to your home in Gainesville, from literally just got back home from SEC Media Days, what was the feel? You were in Nashville for the entire event. Was it NIL driven? Was it playoff driven? I mean, what was your kind of big takeaways as you left SEC Media Days?
It was really boring for a season that should be pretty fun in that league. I don't care what they say about NIL. The commissioners can complain all they want about needing a federal bill and all that. I don't care. They're not going to get one. They'll have to figure it out themselves eventually. So I eagerly await when they actually start trying to figure it out themselves. So not worried about that. The only thing that really kind of caught me was the Alabama people with a legitimate chip on the shoulder. Now, they did wind up getting picked to win the West, but barely over LSU. And everybody thinks Georgia's going to win the league. Everybody thinks Georgia's going to repeat as national champion, which is weird because, as Nebraska folks well know from that 96 season, it is really hard to three-peat. Hasn't happened since 1936 in Minnesota. So the math and the probability say that Georgia won't win the national title this year. But, if you put the season in a vacuum, if they weren't 2-time defending champs, you go, yeah, well, on paper, they probably should.
Is the hesitancy regarding Alabama, Andy, that they don't know who the quarterback's going to be, that they're going into camp with 3 guys, and Nick Saban told all the media folks that we gotta let the cake bake, is what he said.
And he also correctly said that carrot cake was his favorite cake. So I appreciated that from Nick Saban. Yeah. But yeah, the quarterback thing, I feel like is a little overblown when you have a roster as good as they have. They're going to be good no matter who they pick. It was a little bit weird because it's not like they've had a rash of transfers or they haven't recruited well in terms of ranking at that position they have. It's just they didn't like anybody they had coming out of spring practice enough to say that's our guy. And they went and got Tyler Buckner out of the transfer portal from Notre Dame. And, the assumption is Buckner will start because he worked with Tommy Rees at Notre Dame. I don't know if that's the easiest assumption. I'm not sure you just assume that. Ty Simpson and Jalen Milroe should have a chance to win this job. But it is weird, especially with them coming in with a new coordinator. And so, but you think about it, Alabama has won 4 national titles under Nick Saban with a first-year starting quarterback. Greg McElroy did it. A.J. McCarron did it. Mac Jones did it. I'm missing one here. Who am I missing? It was...
Was it Blake?
No, Jacob Coker.
Oh,
how could I forget? Because the 2015 one is the one that is probably the closest parallel here, where they actually had a 5-man competition going into preseason camp that year, and none of those guys really set the world on fire. Jake Coker didn't wind up being an NFL quarterback, but was perfectly good enough for them to win a national title in 2015.
Andy, you'll be obviously out in Chicago or Indianapolis for the Big Ten media days as well. I think first I want to start with Northwestern because they haven't held a press conference on campus. They haven't had anybody speak, but here they're going to send this under 40 interim head coach, David Braun, up on the podium, who's not even been in Evanston for a football season.
Yeah.
First official public spokesperson for this football program. What are your thoughts, expectations going into this on Wednesday?
Well, when you think about it, though, Sean, he's kind of actually the perfect guy to send up because he can be like, I didn't have anything to do with this. I wasn't there. I don't know. I just got here. He was at North Dakota State last year. And, you know, it's crazy because he was hired to kind of resurrect this defense, but now thrown into an almost impossible situation because, you know, this season, they weren't going to be very good this season anyway. And now you've got all of this swirling around, and this is not going away. This is not going to stop. It feels like there's going to be drips and drabs of this. Now that you've got plaintiffs' attorneys and class action suits and all that coming in, it's going to be a lot. And, you know, think about this. You've got Pat Fitzgerald. He's defending himself against all these accusations. But then you've also got named in the lawsuits. You've got Derek Gregg, their current AD. Jim Phillips, their former AD, who is the current ACC commissioner, and then the current president, Michael Schill, and the former president, Morton Shapiro. So this is just going to keep coming all season. And, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if this scandal wipes out Northwestern's administration too, because they're going to probably need a fresh start after this.
Andy, I mean, I know you have a lot going on and you cover the nation. Unlike us, we pretty much focus on a team and a conference. What I'm wondering is have you had kind of a chance to stop and think about, I guess, your level of surprise that this is happening to Pat Fitzgerald, that this is happening? This is a prestigious institution.
I'm not surprised by anything, Stephen, and I'm not. Nothing involving one particular coach is going to surprise me, you know, and that's what it was interesting getting texts from people when this started to break, and they said, "Well, can you believe it's Pat Fitzgerald?" I'm like, they're all football coaches. Let's not get this twisted. You don't know what's going on in every program. Right. None of us does. So, and the thing is, Fitzgerald maintains that he didn't know anything about this. The investigation that Northwestern did said Fitzgerald didn't know anything about this. Now, given the information that's come out, it's pretty hard to believe at this point that he wouldn't have known.
Right.
And also, if he really didn't know, it's actually probably more of a negative than a positive for him.
Right.
So I don't know. It's one of those things that you don't know really what's going on in anybody's house, even your neighbor. So I've gotten past the point of being surprised by anything.
Okay.
I mean, you just look at this job too. I mean, there's talk about the new stadium being built, $800 million, a donation from the Ryan family. You know, Northwestern has already been kind of at a disadvantage in the portal era because you can't just transfer to Northwestern.
Right.
There's so many things working against whoever takes this job. I mean, we don't know what the carnage is going to be with portal players leaving the program. I mean, how can they recover from this? And do you think they will?
Jobs of Big Ten money. That's how they recover. Now, you got to make sure you're not losing the Ryan family as a donor like that. If something like that were to happen, then it is a big problem. But they have massive amounts of money coming in because they're in the Big Ten. And that is what will make it attractive. Maybe not more so than a good Big 12, ACC, Pac-12 type job because the challenges are obvious. But if you're going to make $40 million, whether it works or not, guess what? A lot of people are going to sign up for that.
Andy, I'm interested. We got to switch the conversation to Nebraska. Nebraska fans want to hear what you think. And it's a simple question. What did you think about the Matt Rhule hire?
Oh, I like it. And I've talked to him a couple times since and asked him where is Nebraska relative to where Temple was when you got there and where Baylor was when you got there.
What's he say?
He says that it feels like year two at those places. That they're, and especially Baylor was burned down to the ground when he got there, and he had a lot of work to do. There wasn't as much work. I mean, there was obviously the issues that caused Scott Frost to not succeed there, but it wasn't a roster that had to be completely turned over. They didn't have to do a Colorado type fire sale on the roster. They had guys that they liked, and then they brought in some transfers that they thought would be able to help. Like Jeff Sims is a prime example. Jeff Sims has the body type, the tools you want. It didn't happen for him at Georgia Tech, and there's a lot of reasons why that might not be his fault. So, I think that makes you pretty optimistic about what Matt Rhule can do in terms of turning this program around. Now, I'm not expecting miracles right off the bat, but can he make Nebraska bowl eligible in year one? I think that's a reasonable expectation. And I think if they can do that, that's a great sign of progress.
Andy, college football as well as anybody. When I tell you that Nebraska has the longest streak for all Power 5 teams for not appearing in a bowl game, how much does that get your attention?
It's crazy, but then you think about it and okay, it makes sense because the Mike Riley hire never made a lick of sense. I mean, other than perhaps Sean Eichhorst was tired of getting yelled at by Bo Pelini, so he hired the nicest person in college football. But Mike Riley was about to get run out of Oregon State when he got hired. So asking him to turn Nebraska into a better program than Bo Pelini had it was asking a lot, because at that point in his career, and he had been very good previously at Oregon State, but I don't think at that point in his career he was ready for that type of job. And then the Frost thing still mystifies me because he was very good at UCF. Now, granted, he inherited quite a bit of talent. It wasn't like George O'Leary had stopped recruiting there. It was just his players basically mutinied on him in the last year, and they left a lot there. And it was a different caliber of competition in the league. So it is crazy to think that it's been this long, but I don't think they're that far away. I really don't. From bowl eligibility, I'm not talking about competing for Big Ten titles. They're very far away from that. But I do think Matt Rhule, if you look at what he did at Baylor right off the bat, he had a very good idea of what he wanted in terms of players. They were looking for certain athletic traits, and it wasn't always because in that situation at Baylor, you couldn't attract the type of recruits that Nebraska can right now because they were dealing with the fallout from the scandal. It was a lot harder to recruit at that time, but they found some gems at that point. So now that they've got a lot more to choose from, I feel like. So I think he can get it going pretty quickly.
Andy, I think I can ask you this too. I mean, again, you've been around this so long. You understand the nuances of college football. Do you feel like Matt Rhule is a good fit for his environment, the Big Ten?
Yeah, I do. I think he understands what wins there. Now, it's interesting because what wins there it sort of is changing, because you look at Wisconsin and what they did. They hire Luke Fickell. Luke Fickell goes out and hires Phil Longo to run his offense. Phil's a air raid guy. Wisconsin's trying to win the Big Ten. They're not trying to win the Big Ten West, which, by the way, won't exist next year. And that's the part I'm interested in. And I think Matt is smart enough to see the big picture on that too. Mm-hmm. He's been like, what he built at Temple wouldn't work at Baylor. And what will work at Nebraska is probably somewhere between those two things. And so I think he's got a pretty good idea of what that needs to be. I would imagine his idea is build Nebraska to try to win the whole Big Ten.
Yes.
Because that's what I'm curious about. Because I can't see Illinois or Minnesota shifting gears away from the personalities they've established. And I don't know, that's not enough to beat Ohio State and Michigan and Penn State. It won't work. But what Wisconsin's doing could work. And I imagine what Matt's going to do is closer to that.
Okay.
Andy, who do you got East and West to win the Big Ten divisions this year?
So I have a hard time picking against Michigan right now in the East, because they've beaten Ohio State 2 years in a row. They feel built to beat Ohio State. Now, they got to go to State College. This is a year where Penn State, in terms of elite talent, feels like they are as close to Ohio State as they've been in a long time. Michigan, on the other hand, just stockpiled full of NFL-type talent. Now, you look at the recruiting rankings, and there's still a gap between Michigan and Ohio State. But I'd say the way that Michigan has developed players over the last few years, because I don't look at it strictly as what you bring in. I look at it as, what did you bring in terms of your raw material? And then when I talk to draft people and NFL scout type people, how many NFL ready players who, if they're draft eligible now, like how many of them are going to be in the league next year? Mm-hmm. Michigan has a ton of those guys. I was talking to Jim Nagy from the Senior Bowl the other day. Mm-hmm. He has 7 Michigan offensive linemen who are draft eligible. So this doesn't even include the freshmen and the sophomores. 7 that he believes will be in NFL camps next year. So guys that don't even play are going to be in NFL camps next year. So that tells you where Michigan's at right now. And oh, by the way, if anybody needs a head coach, Sharon Moore could be your guy down the road. Although I think he's the next head coach in Michigan. But that's the challenge that everybody's got to overcome is a Michigan team that has built more NFL talent year after year since Harbaugh revamped that coaching staff. So I'm going to pick them in the East. The West is hard, but it's hard for me to pick against Luke Fickell. I go back to when Luke Fickell took over at Cincinnati, and the current senator, Tommy Tuberville, did not leave the cupboard very stocked at Cincinnati. And Fickell came in and immediately upgraded their recruiting, but none of those guys could help right off the bat. And it was rough that first year. But if you look at how some of those guys played, and especially as they got into that second year, they were really good. He took what was already there, which was not, these were not highly rated recruits or anything like that, and he made them play really well. He's got a lot more to work with at Wisconsin. I think they're going to be good right off the bat.
Okay.
All right, Andy, we appreciate the time, and we will see you in Indianapolis on Wednesday and Thursday.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Andy, thanks a ton for that.
Thanks again to Andy Staples of On3. Make sure you follow him on the On3 YouTube channels. Download his podcasts. He's really good. And what a great addition to On3 to have his daily insight on our channels, on our network. You heard it right there. I mean, he's dialed in.
You heard it. He knows the nation. He understands the college game at a super high level. What he said about Michigan was fascinating. Fascinating. They have 7 NFL caliber linemen on the roster right now. It's fascinating. 2 things come to mind. Sean, go back and watch the Nebraska tape last year. What I wrote about after that game, what I saw subsequently when I rewatched the game, it was incredible how they moved Nebraska's defensive line off the ball. They were pushing them. They were pushing them 5 yards down the field, 7 yards down the field at times in the second half. Then the other part of that discussion is this. Saying Andy mentions the Michigan offensive line having 7 NFL caliber guys. Sean, I think you could go across the line of scrimmage to their defensive line and maybe find 6 or 7 too. They're loaded up front on defense. Loaded. They feel like the Michigan folks feel like their defensive line is as deep and talented as it's been since 1997 when they won it all, when they shared the national.
And they have 2 NFL running backs.
Yeah.
At least 2.
Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards. Where they're a little light is they don't have that big time. They don't have Ohio State receivers at all. They don't have.
But in late November,
receivers. Yeah,
when that game is played,
what wins?
Just when you're in a backyard alley fight with light flurries coming down on Thanksgiving Saturday, as it's been the last few years.
Well, not last year. It was sunny, but it was cold, obviously.
But where it's just a straight up knuckle brawl.
Yeah.
Michigan has built their team.
Harbaugh.
Nebraska goes in there.
Sean, that's Harbaugh.
Last year in November.
Yeah.
And that was not a conducive day to play football. And they just said, we're just going to beat the tar out of
it was conducive if you play like Michigan.
Right.
Yeah.
And, throw your deep balls to Trey Palmer and see how it works today, Nebraska. Yeah. That's kind of what they said. And we're just going to punch you in the face for 60 minutes.
Yeah. Well, yeah. That's a hard conversation. I wanted to ask Andy too, shifting gears, Sean.
We could have went almost 2 headlines, but we didn't want to overuse Andy in our first appearance.
I wonder what that, think about Northwestern situation right now. They start the season on the road at Rutgers. What's their first home game going to look like when they play September 9th at Ryan Field against UTEP? I was reading today in the Chicago Tribune, people are turning in their season tickets.
So
in mass,
they're kind of like they're the trip for other fans. Like when Nebraska plays them, they benefit off Nebraska fans.
You think UTEP's going to load up that stadium?
No.
No, that's the thing. It's gonna be light. But anyway, so Andy, Andy knows his stuff. I mean, that was really fascinating.
Yeah, that Northwestern, you mentioned that game. Will there be 5,000 fans there?
I think so.
I don't know.
I would put it this way: will it be 20,000 fans there?
They don't normally draw 20,000.
Oh yeah, they do. They averaged like 27.
I think until there's some clarity in what's going to happen, well, it's tough. David Braun's not even 40 years old.
Yeah, that's a good question you asked. And Andy had an interesting answer that they're sending David Braun, who is he's the defensive coordinator. He was hired in the off season, so he wasn't there, and he can play the card of, look, I wasn't even here. I can't answer these questions. I still believe that there's a large part of me that says they shouldn't send anybody to have to answer these questions. We're talking about,
can you get away with that though in the conference?
We're talking about questions about a culture of hazing of a sexualized nature. We're talking about questions about a culture that enabled racism. These are very heavy topics to be asking anybody, let alone a guy who's never been a head coach, David Braun, and a bunch of 3 players.
And how often? Let's be real.
Sean, I'm saying I wouldn't send. If I were the AD, if I were the president of Northwestern, I wouldn't put those guys.
Are they allowed to? The conference may not allow.
Oh, come on, allowed to. What's the Big Ten going to do?
Conference obligation to be
obligation. What's the Big Ten going to do? Fine them.
But you think they got this.
You know what their endowment is? It's like $12 billion. It's not a fine's not going to.
I don't think they want to send the message their program shut down though.
It's not sending that message. I would say you put out a news release on.
Well, they're not going to do that.
On Tuesday or Wednesday that says, because of the nature of the situation here, we're not going to put our coaches and student athletes in a position to have to answer these questions.
And they don't deal with a lot of media there. Think about Northwestern. They don't have like a big pack of media that covers them daily. And do you think Pat Fitzgerald and the program before, they never received tough questions? Well,
there wasn't a scandal.
But I'm just saying, like in general, like the media it wasn't like they dealt with anything close to what this would be.
Right. So Sean, I know what people, our dear viewers, will say. Sipple, you don't think they should be accountable? I think the principals in this discussion should be accountable. Fitzgerald, Michael Schill, the AD, Michael Schill's the president, Pat Fitzgerald's the head coach, Derek Gregg, the AD. Yeah, I do. I think they should be held accountable. But should David Braun be held accountable? Who wasn't there?
Can you imagine if Nebraska didn't have a press conference at all to this point after all?
I can imagine if there was a scandal of this magnitude. Yes, I can imagine it. If there was a scandal of this magnitude.
Oh, but can you?
But if the sitting coach was not fired, yeah, you send him. If Fitzgerald was still in place, which would be very odd if you were, you send him. I would be very receptive to Northwestern sending Michael Schill, the president, to Big Ten Media Days to answer questions. But David Braun?
Then it would take the whole, the focus is going to be off football then, but then you're really taking the focus.
Have I convinced you, Sean, that perhaps you should not send them?
But they're going to send them.
Okay.
I'm not going to send you to El Toro Mexican restaurant. Have I convinced you? Headline number 3, Nebraska volleyball receives the largest gift ever to a women's sports team in the NIL era. Nebraska's 1890 Initiative Collective has received a gift from Rod Yates and the Nebraska Crossing Outlet Center in Gretna.
Mm-hmm.
It's the brand new luxurious outdoor shopping center mall to the tune of $5 million over 10 years.
How about that?
Again, the largest gift ever to a women's sports program in the NIL era. And you break down the numbers, there's 12 scholarship volleyball players on a team.
Okay.
So if you just broke down $5 million over 10 years, that's almost $42,000 a year per scholarship player. And that's not counting what they've already received,
which is significant.
So John, it's not out of line to say like John Cook could have close to $100,000 per girl on his roster.
It's amazing.
Per year.
Yeah. We'll throw in that Just Data is a financial technology company that kind of entered into a partnership with Nebraska Crossing, and they made this money available to the 1890 initiative. So what's it mean? It means it ensures that Nebraska volleyball will remain probably a top 10 program for years to come. I mean, it won't be a talent issue, if they would drop off. They're going to continue to recruit the type of talent that has made them a force already. The rich just got richer. You could put it that way. Significantly richer, because there's no women's program in the 3 years of NIL, which happy birthday turned 3 this week, the NIL era. There's no women's program in the country, volleyball, basketball, any sport, that has received a gift this large. This is groundbreaking. This is seriously a feather in the cap of the 1890 initiative. It really is. This is a flex. This is a major flex.
And they're not done. I mean, there's going to be more. I mean, I think as things move on, and you're going to see 1890 have a brand new office right across the street from the Lead Center with very public, visible signage across the street from the campus. So, I mean, their presence, I think, will pick up even more. But, I think that's something, too, that gets your attention. If you want to make a gift, you can just write a check and earmark it for sport. So if you want to give Will Bolt that kind of money, somebody can do that. And this is what the Nebraska Crossing said. We're going to give you $5 million, but it's just for volleyball.
This will get people's attention. Rod Yates, Just Data.
And they're going to do content, too. It's not like this is just a gift. I mean, they have to perform some services for the money. So you will see Nebraska volleyball, do photo shoots, postings, pictures, marketing for the Nebraska Crossing.
Well, this is what we're talking about, is a gem of a program, the Nebraska volleyball program, which I would say is important to the state at this point. I think that program is very important on the state sports landscape. Like I just called it gem. Where they play is a gym at the Bob Devaney Sports Center. It's a gorgeous arena. It's become something that thousands of people identify with. So I think this is money well spent. You're going to continue to see, all Americans roll through here.
I know they'll never do this, but think if they just said, we're going to play all our games in Pinnacle Bank Arena, and they sold it out.
John Cook right now is saying, slow down, slow.
No, I know he doesn't want to do that.
No, you don't want to do that.
Think if they sold that out, and then the amount of revenue the university would make even more because of the demand to see that program. Or maybe just played a few games, but I know they love their advantage.
Oh, they love the advantage at Devaney Center.
It's, it took a lot to convince John Cook to leave the Coliseum.
Oh, yeah. Right now he's cringing. No, let's not. We're not.
No. Yeah. He's getting his football. I mean, the 90,000, you think about what that crowd is. I mean, that's basically the size of 10 crowds at Devaney.
You're referring to Volleyball Day in Nebraska?
Yes.
Yeah, which is coming up. Volleyball Day in Nebraska, there'll be 90,000 people in Memorial Stadium. Yeah, this is a real, I don't know, exciting time for the volleyball program. This coupled with Nebraska Volleyball Day in Nebraska. I mean, this is like I said, these are major flexes by John late in his career, by John Cook.
Think about
I'm going to say John's late in his career. I mean, he can't go forever, right?
Think about these two things. 90,000 plus at that game. That will be the largest crowd ever to see a women's sporting event in this country and possibly the world.
Yeah, they could make a run at the world record.
And then now the largest NIL gift for any women's sport. That's UConn basketball. That's LSU basketball. That's Caitlin Clark, Iowa basketball.
Right.
That's every other top level women's program. Not even no one's receiving anything close to this.
This is serious momentum. I mean, that's what it is. It's serious momentum, and it translates. I mean, because it's to see what I think is important to drive home. It's directly related to talent acquisition. This gift from the Nebraska Crossing, Just Data. That's why the collectives to me are extremely important. You can't emphasize enough, because if you're giving money to this, you are giving it with talent acquisition in mind. There's nothing, Sean, more important to building these programs than talent acquisition. That's what you can talk about, all these other ancillary things, which we get lost in way too much, but it's about recruiting All-Americans. Transfers, but All-American caliber players. We talk about topics that, to me, sometimes I'm just like, why do we even talk about this? You got to go get talent. That's what this is. Talent acquisition. Matt Davidson is in charge of talent acquisition, and that is critical.
And this is about Nebraska. This is about helping Nebraska compete in the current landscape, and you have to have a collective to do that.
Yeah, you need talent.
All right, headline number 4. Since the end of spring ball, has anything happened, Steve Sipple, to change your expectations for Nebraska in 2023? I pose this question, this headline, as we are about a week away from being in Indianapolis.
Nothing that hits you over the head, because it's been sort of a quiet off season, which is good. But what enhances my confidence in the program under Matt Rhule is sort of this, I mean, what we see on a daily basis, what we experienced, for instance, when we went to Belton, Texas, and Houston, is this, and what we see as he puts together this 2024 recruiting class, which is at 24 players. What do you see, Sean? A lot of organization, right? You see a lot of structure. You see them verbalize what they want to do and then do it. Well, and that in some ways translates to me to the 2023 season, in that I expect to see organization and structure on the field. Football, to me, successful football to me is largely about organization and structure. Because what is football, Sean? You're just trying to minimize mistakes, right? It's what do you hear coaches say a lot? The team that often wins is the team that makes the fewest mistakes.
The details.
It doesn't beat itself. I think Rhule has a track record in college football that tells you that his structure and organization makes sense at this level.
Yeah, I think Jeff Sims, just as we learn more, just think about back to Casey Thompson. If they were really worried about quarterback, would there have been a stronger push to keep Casey Thompson? Because you remember before that deadline to enter the portal.
This was subsequent of spring ball, right after spring ball.
You know, it looked like, oh man, Casey Thompson might stay and fight it out.
Right.
And you were on this big give him a chance to win the job campaign.
I was on that campaign,
and it didn't go so well for you. But all of a sudden, then he put his name in the portal once the deadline hit on that day. Casey Thompson did, and that told you right there, because I think Matt Rhule could have fought harder and maybe made some stronger assurances if they really felt like they needed Casey Thompson. But I think they felt like, hey, we got what we need and more.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And that technically happened subsequent of spring ball. So yeah, that's something. But again, I guess I would go to the quiet of the offseason, which I always regard as a positive. As a positive. Nebraska in recent years has had very quiet off seasons. Now, it didn't translate into success for Frost. It didn't, but they didn't have a lot of trouble off the field. Pelini's teams, they had a significant amount of trouble for a while. Still won, but it wasn't always quiet.
When you say trouble, do you mean like guys leaving?
Like Ernest Suttles breaking a beer bottle over a kid's head and getting arrested, a receiver running from campus police because he has marijuana, those sort of things. You're not seeing any of that right now.
No. In fact, we lost our police chief in Lincoln today as we're taping this show. We don't even have a police chief right now in this city. So it's been a very quiet day of headlines for the Nebraska summer of headlines and
for Nebraska football.
No news is good news, and
usually it is, yeah.
But yeah, I think Matt Rhule too has established kind of the boundaries of what he wants, and there is discipline in this program. I mean, I know there are guys running and doing extra things.
Oh, there's discipline
happening behind the scenes. It's not like this is some sort of country club offseason. I mean,
no.
There's a lot of accountability and discipline behind the scenes.
Well, that's something I'm glad you mentioned, because if you're a Nebraska fan, you're looking for reasons to have your confidence enhanced. That's one. You know what I'm not worried about with Matt Rhule? Discipline. Yeah, we've seen enough already. You shared with me off air something that well, we're not going to bring it on air, but there's discipline.
Oh yeah,
there's discipline.
People being held accountable.
Yeah, it's not. And you know what? People are going to say, "Oh, come on, Sip." There's always that in this program. No, there's not. Under Riley, it got awful in terms of accountability. It was awful. I mean, there were plenty of stories about guys that weren't going to the weight room, not getting there on time, not going, period. And you could see it. It's
showing up late.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know that Frost's program had a horrible discipline issue. I just think it was I mean, let's face it, their problem started at the top.
Well, in the COVID era, it just kind of clouded up the vision of it because of almost losing a lot of that 2020 year in what it normally would have been.
Okay.
And then even the spillover to 2021, it just didn't, like, that little window of 18 months there hurt Nebraska.
It did. Then okay. I mean, COVID, the approach we liked, you and I liked their Nebraska's very aggressive approach, liked it, didn't work. 3-5. Okay. Then 2021 happened. 2021 was a weird year. They went 4-8, but they didn't seem like they were that far away. Then what happened? 2022 just unraveled.
It fell apart.
It just unraveled so quickly that it feels like in some ways we never really got a handle on exactly the things that were wrong because it unraveled so quickly in 2022.
Yeah, that Northwestern game, like, there were moments you're like, wow, they look pretty good. And then you're like, wow, they're not very good.
No, God, I'll tell you what, that game, you're going to kill me for saying this, but is a pretty good example of why you got to be careful about taking a team overseas. When is your program equipped for it? I would argue that Nebraska's program under Frost wasn't equipped. It really hurt them. I mean, they came back and they didn't play very well.
They almost got beat by North Dakota.
Yeah, they didn't play very well against North Dakota. And then Georgia Southern, I don't know how many yards did they put up, Sean? They scored every time they had the ball almost. I mean,
they put up more yards than any opponent in Memorial Stadium history.
Yeah, I mean, we were sitting up there sort of mesmerized because we were thinking, oh, Nebraska's offense is moving the ball very consistently. It's just a matter of the defense getting some stops, which it never did against Georgia Southern. Okay. And Georgia Southern wasn't very good, it turns out. Very odd.
All right, let's go. Headline number 5, odds and ends.
Oh, yeah.
I want to start first with the status of the Go Big construction project, because I think initially the thought is Nebraska was going to be able to be moved in at least to the parts that they need for the football season, the locker room, the weight room. This is the live look at where it's at right now. Steve Sipple, does it look like Nebraska will be in this building by next week?
No, I mean, there was a school of thought that perhaps the players could move into the locker rooms and use the weight room. So if the locker rooms and weight room were ready, the school of thought was, let's go ahead and move in. We will have to ask Trev Alberts and Matt Rhule next week in Indianapolis. Is that still the plan?
I don't see how it is right now. I mean, it just doesn't seem like this is a functional building ready to house 150 football players.
And if you put 150 football players in there with a full coaching staff and training staff, can you do that with construction ongoing?
With jackhammers and cranes and...
Well, I don't know. Is there cranes over there?
Yeah, the cranes are probably, but
I don't think they're...
My question now is, like, when will this all be done? Because we know it's not going to be ready for the football season. So will there be a point in the fall, like the bye week? Is that the logical period when you move the team into the locker room if they can't move in now? Because if they can't move in at the start of camp, you're not going to do it in the flow of things.
Right. And now we talked about this earlier this week on our Husker online radio show. Now, this is just my opinion. It's just an opinion. If I were the head coach, I wouldn't move a team mid-season. Like you suggested, maybe the October bye week. I wouldn't say, okay, this is when we're gonna change homes. All right during the season. No, I'm not doing it. I think it's too disruptive. Now, Matt Rhule might say, simple, I'll run the program, and we have a lot of personnel over here, support staff, that will make the move, and the players won't be stressed at all. So maybe that's the case, but I'll believe it when I see it.
I don't think you want to cut corners though.
Well, yeah, I don't. Yeah, there's that element too.
All right, I want to hit on this too. Colorado has announced that the game with Nebraska is a sellout.
Okay.
What does that mean to you? I mean, I'm not surprised. I am a little surprised how early they called it, because if you did go on Colorado's website, they had several tickets listed at basically scalpers prices, like $600-$700 through the school website.
600, 700.
I mean, they have got the prices on this game sky high, because they know Nebraska fans want to go. They know Colorado fans want to go. It's the first game of the Deion Sanders era.
It's a rivalry.
It will be interesting to see if some of these tickets flood themselves into the secondary market, because that's what this game is now going to turn into. It's a secondary market game where you will not be able to buy tickets anymore through the school. Mm-hmm. And is there some other things we don't know? I mean, has Colorado like moved some of these tickets to a partner like SeatGeek, where SeatGeek, somebody like that will start unloading these tickets on there for more money that Colorado can make? I mean, I have my questions. I know a lot of people.
What are your questions?
I know a lot of people in the ticket industry. One of my best friends is very caught up on this stuff, and he just kind of
what's his question
about, did they truly sell this out, or is there going to be a movement of a lot of these tickets that flood into a secondary market, even for a higher price now?
Well, if Nebraska were to beat Minnesota and Colorado were to push TCU, now think about it. I mean, if that will increase demand. That'll increase enthusiasm for the game, right? So I don't know. I don't know how it's all going to shake out. We'll see. I appreciate your
it's one of the highest priced tickets in college football, though, right now.
How about that? And you have no objection to me calling it a rivalry?
Well, it was a rivalry for many years.
Didn't it feel like a rivalry when Nebraska was out there with Adrian Martinez?
As
did it feel
grown
like
men were grabbing their
junk. Did it feel like a rivalry to you?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's why I don't mind saying it. It still feels like a rivalry to me.
Yeah, I think when you see
who covers Colorado for On3, is it Brian Howell?
No, we don't have a Colorado site.
Oh, we don't have a Colorado site. Well, it was the Boulder Daily Camera writer. He just said, I was a little taken aback by what he said. It was the Boulder Daily Camera beat writer. He said, he just said it casually, but he said, Colorado fans hate Nebraska.
Oh, that's been the case for years. I mean, Bill McCartney, when he came into Colorado, he was from Michigan.
Hate's a strong word.
And he wanted to create an Ohio State-like rivalry for Colorado. And he looked at a program that was classy, they did things the right way, and he said, I want it to be Nebraska. And that's how it kind of formed.
Sure.
But it got according to Dave Plotty, the longtime media relations director for Colorado, who's been with the program since the 70s.
Yes.
He said some of that got taken a little bit out of context. He chose Nebraska as the rival for them because he had a lot of respect for them. But then there was that period in the late 80s, early 90s where Colorado got really good.
Yeah.
And that's when that became a rivalry.
Yeah. And I think the feeling is still very intense. It felt that way to me.
No doubt.
When Nebraska was out there, it was intense. Anyway, so that gets us into a sort of an interesting Pac-12 discussion. Pac-12 Media Days is today, Sean. We're talking to our listeners on
Friday. Yep. One-day event.
And Pac-12 Media Days is today. And now Prime's not there. Deion Sanders is not there, which really takes away from everything. But they still don't have that media rights deal in place that I know of, unless it's happened.
It's not in place.
It's not in place. It's very awkward. We don't know what's going to. The future of that conference, the Pac-12, is very much in doubt. And I want to share with you something that Brock Huard said. Brock Huard, do you remember Brock Huard?
Yes.
He was a quarterback at Washington, and now he's a Fox Sports analyst. He called. Now he's in the industry. He called the Pac-12 situation with media rights negotiations as he described it as being very dire. Okay. That's Dennis Dodd reported a couple months ago, Sean. I mean, it's almost like surreal that the agreement might come down to an agreement with NBC Universal, which would put the games on the USA, which would put late night games on USA Network.
Come on. Now.
This is extraordinary. Now, what Huard went on to say is this. Think about this, Sean. think about this and count your blessings that we don't really deal with this much in the Big Ten to a large degree. He said these universities broke the trust of these networks by not showing up, by not caring. Their fans don't show up. And frankly, in some of the places like Palo Alto and Berkeley, they'd rather not have football. See, Sean, see what the problem is? The network's advertisers need numbers and eyeballs.
And this goes back to COVID. Think about the shenanigans the Pac-12 didn't want to play football.
They did.
That they were smarting everybody. Oh, we're real smarter and more sophisticated than you. We're not going to play football, even though everywhere else in the world, from midget football to SEC football, Big 12 football, ACC football, Notre Dame football, eventually Big 10 football, played football. Then they had a play. And then they come out and play. I mean, wasn't it like a 6-game season?
Yeah, it was a short.
I mean, it was ridiculous.
Right.
Like Oregon went to the Rose Bowl with like a 4-2 record or something. It was, or the Fiesta Bowl, excuse me.
Right. You're right. It's an interesting conversation because the Pac-12 right now is pretty good. I mean, you look at that, look at the quarterbacks in the conference, Sean. They have 3 of the best quarterback situations in the country. When you look at Oregon with Bo Nix, Washington with Michael Penix, USC with Caleb Williams. Their quarterback situations are, you could make an argument, those are the 3 best in the nation or close to it. So they still play good football out there. Washington's playing really good football. Oregon has momentum. Now, at Pac-12 Media Days, are you going to talk a lot about Chip Kelly making a turnaround at UCLA when UCLA's headed out? How much are you going to talk about USC, which, by the way, is picked to win the Pac-12 this year by the media? How much are you talking about them knowing they're gone? These teams are leaving.
What if Oregon got the chance and Washington got the chance to go to the Big Ten? They'd be gone too.
I think so. And then what happens? The light dims greatly on West Coast football, which I've told you I'm not comfortable with. As a consumer, as a college football fan, I don't want the West Coast, Sean. I don't want the West Coast to go away.
USC, UCLA, Washington, Oregon, the 4 best teams in the West would be in the Big Ten. What would be wrong with that?
It's not really West Coast football anymore.
They still play on what do you mean though?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I get what you're saying, but I just want a strong conference out there.
Stanford's not going to be good anymore.
No, what I would prefer is to have a strong, thriving Pac-12.
It ain't going to happen though.
It doesn't look like it.
The fans don't show up.
Not all the
teams that only Oregon now would recruit at like a top 10 level, maybe in that league, but will they? And then the revenue's not going to be there. How can you compete when the other leagues are getting the money that they're getting and you're going to be under half that money? Like,
no. We'll see.
I mean, the Big Ten is going to be 100 million. SEC is going to be around 100 million. I mean, not quite, but you know what I'm saying.
Ooh, not 100. No,
80, 90.
Let's say 70.
Yeah, but they're going to have a significant advantage in ticket revenue, and they're going to have other things. The Pac-12 is going to be lucky to get 35 million.
But that would be about what the Big 12 is getting, what those teams are getting annually. See, what the Pac-12 people have said, we can match the Big 12.
But they haven't been able to do it yet.
Well, we haven't seen it. So I don't know. We'll have to see. But the Pac-12 has said, it's a layup. We can match the Big 12.
I don't buy that. Okay. Oregon State, Washington State, they're not getting ratings. Arizona's not getting ratings. Arizona State probably not getting. I mean,
Cal.
Who's getting the ratings? Like how many teams in that league? How many matchups in that league would generate a viewing audience of 4 million people?
Not
many. And that's what the Big Ten and the SEC can do every week. They get big draws, 4 to 10 million people watching these big games.
But as a long-time college football follower, the idea of the Pac-12 disintegrating, I don't think is healthy.
No, I mean, I don't say I disagree, but it's also there's a lot of things like you don't want to go away, but they do.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
true.
But it should be fun. We're going to do HuskerOnline Headlines next week after Big Ten Media Days. We'll preview Big Ten Media Days, though, this week on the HuskerOnline Show, coming to you a day early on Tuesday. So make sure you follow, subscribe to us. We'll have full coverage in Indianapolis as Steve Sipple, Robin Washek, Greg Peterson, and I will all be out there covering the happenings at Media Days. But Download, like, follow, subscribe to us here on the HuskerOnline YouTube page, and also anywhere you can find headlines. For Steve Sipple, I'm Sean Callahan, signing off for another edition of HuskerOnline Headlines.